Thank you, Madam Chair. So this was a bill when introduced in the last session that was of great interest to me, both as a physician who has watched and guided people through end of life acutely and chronically through all of my career, and who has had loved ones who have had to wrestle with that end of life, very difficult act. And to a large extent, I agree with Senator Norman that my first impression was that the initial bill was too cute by half, meaning that I believe that there are already things that are done in a very personal and private way between people who are facing end-of-life challenges and their caregivers, and decisions that are made in very personal and private ways to make their transfer or their movement to the next stage as easy as possible. And that somehow by legislating, we were making that a more difficult process by shedding light on something that in some ways I think is really quite a private thing. I was also very concerned about the position that it put physicians and other caregivers in, both in terms of the record-keeping requirements, which are, I find, somewhat onerous, and other regulatory aspects, mandates, which most physicians take, as other professionals, take great issue with things that mandate how we practice. But I also understood that my preferred option, which would just be to somehow say that, no, assisting someone with suicide is no longer considered a felony, it's a personal decision, and let that be all that you do, is not a practical solution. It's also been very clear to me that my constituents very much want to have the freedom to choose how they end their life without feeling like they have to be secretive about it. And that this is an option that is what this piece of legislation aims to give them. So what I have committed myself to and have been trying to do in the past several months is to work to make this bill the best bill it could be, because I do believe that this is an option that the citizens of Maryland want to have. With that in mind, I very much respect the concerns of the opposition, those who oppose, I don't want to say the opposition, that's not quite right, but those who oppose the legislation, the opponents, I guess that's the way to put it. And I've listened very carefully to their concerns, and I think there has been an earnest effort to assuage the concerns where they were found to be appropriate or legitimate. I think a lot of the concerns that were raised really don't apply to this particular piece of legislation. So I think that the bill has become better. And since I only have 5 minutes, although I have notes point by point on many of the opponents' arguments, I will skip those, but be happy to share them with anybody who would be interested in hearing them. But all that being said, I have decided that I will introduce an additional piece of legislation which I think strengthens this whole field. And that is a piece of legislation that would require the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene to develop a booklet and a website that comprehensively lists end-of-life options. Because one thing that's become very clear to me is that most people lack any real knowledge of what their options are. And that includes everything from hospice care to palliative care to terminal sedation to simply withholding nutrition or water and sustenance. And that just as I experienced as a plastic surgeon when there was a great deal of concern about breast implants and their health risk, and I was required, when a patient inquired about the use of breast implants at the initial consultation, to hand them the booklet so they'd have information about the risk associated with it. That providers be required at the time that patients inquire about ending their life as an option, that they be referred to or given this booklet so that they can have additional information. I don't think that would be overburdensome to the medical community, because I don't think that most practitioners will have reason or cause to have to give it, because most people aren't going to be asked, but there will be a handful. And they should have that material available to them, and it should be, if we're going to put this legislation into, if we're going to turn this into actual law, then we should be supporting them with the information that is as comprehensive as possible. And I think that that will go a long way to increasing our knowledge as citizens of what it means to die and our options and how we want to face it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Chair, I want to thank you both for your leadership on this issue. Initially,